Alrighty, welcome to the Excitable Soul podcast. Here we are interested in all things purpose. We want to know where and how people find meaning and connection in their lives. In every episode, we're going to be hearing the real life stories of how people have uncovered, understood, and unleashed their own unique sense of purpose. Our hope is that we can all learn from the stories and the journeys of our guests so that we can better find a sense of purpose in our own lives. I'm host James Glover, performance coach and purpose nerd. I'm incredibly excited to be exploring these stories with you. So let's get going, shall we? Today's guest is John Gomes. He is a New York Times best-selling author and trusted advisor to CEOs and leaders. His research and practice centers on creating more human organizations, harnessing the latest findings in neuroscience and experimental psychology. John and the team at his research-based consultancy Outside work with a community of scientists to develop simple and powerful strategies to transform well-being, leadership, and organizational agility. John has lectured at the Side Business School, Oxford University, INSEAD's LEAP program, and the Henley Business School. He has worked extensively in elite sport and is the co-host of popular podcast, The Evolving Leader. His clients include many of the world's largest and most successful organizations: Google, Nike, Condé Nast, eBay, Pfizer, Bank of England, Alexander McQueen, Stella McCartney, BMW, Warner Music, LTA, WTA, UK Sport, and Manchester City Football Club, to name just a few. I'm very fortunate to count John as a mentor and friend. He's a powerful force for good in my life, and I know that we're all going to get something from this conversation. All right, John, welcome to the Excitable Soul podcast. To say I have had the strongest feelings of anticipation and excitement about this conversation would be underplaying it. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast and talking to us about the experiences that have shaped who you are.
Well, it's a pleasure, James. I reciprocate. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
Amazing. Those that have been tuning into to the podcast, all 7 of them so far, have started to get used to the kind of the format that we're creating here around the conversation around a sense of purpose, and people really sharing how they uncovered that, how they then started to really understand it and then unleash it and kind of bring it into the way in which they've shaped their lives and their journeys ahead. And so I guess I'd like to just kind of dive straight in with that first element of uncovering purpose and where meaning, the experiences really that started to shape meaning and significance in your life. I'm wondering if you could just maybe start with sharing 1 or 2 of those moments that you know have truly shaped who you are in the world today.
It's a very deep, big question. I think, if I look back over my life, there was definitely an origin story about something, which was my godfather, who was only alive until I was about 9.
Yeah.
But I still carry the memory of him in me. And he comes back to me unbidden all the time in terms of the unconditional love that he gave. He was an incredibly creative, bon vivant, loved life, was interested in everything, every aspect of culture, old, modern, classic, and new. Took me to some incredible things when I was just, a child, really young child, and assumed that I was an adult. And just shared it to me as if, I was. He's talking, and
No
so
filter. Yeah.
well, kind of, he did talk to me in my terms, but he didn't treat me like a child. He treated me as if I, like I could understand things that, are quite sophisticated, and I love that. So that's one very powerful shaping force. I think the other is a sort of intuition from an early age that there was no vocation. I just love everything.
Yeah.
I love science. I love art. I love music. I love physics. I love, everything. There's everything that's under the sun. And so that was quite frustrating at school,
Yeah.
when the when the teachers say, "What are you going to do? Where are you going to place your bets?" And I was trying to do um, sciences, English, and art at A level. And my English teacher said, "You got to make a choice." And I said, "No, I'm not going to make a choice. It's
Yeah.
crazy." And then my art teacher, who I was doing sort of secretly in an A level art, almost got fired when they found out he was teaching me. Like, I didn't want to be compromised. So there's been a strong kind of narrative in my life, and the voice in my life is that no one discipline holds all the answers, and so
Yeah.
this ability to kind of move backwards and forwards, to have a creative life, but also to not disregard any aspect of, what helps us to make sense of things. That's another very strong part of who I am.
Yeah, and how have you seen that play out for you over time then? Because I guess one of the great things about the power of being able to reflect back is seeing how the dots connect. So
Mm.
how did you see that kind of flourish from those early experiences with your uncle into then, education and so on and so forth, into, the roles that you play now in your life around leading business and being a father and husband, etc.
Mm. Well, I guess like, is that tapping into the intuitive um, moments where you have those aha moments where something's true, that's the kind of like the most rewarding part of my life. When I get this little moment where that's why that's happening, or that's the meaning of this, and I live for that. I live for
Yeah,
that sense of stuff, and it comes in two forms. One is that you see a problem differently, and that's really exciting. And then when you get some sense of a solution, and so joining the dots up is the most precious and most neglected, kind of part of our lives. And we're so
yeah,
rushing forward that we don't get a chance to kind of stand back and do that, have that divergent thought that allows us to do it. So I think from an early age, I grew up in the kind of late '60s and '70s, and life was different than it is now for children.
yeah.
I was bored a lot of the time. So daydreaming was a super skill.
Yeah,
We did. There was no daytime television, so unless you wanted to watch cricket in the summer, which is kind of like deadly, or horse racing or something like that. So that wasn't and going out and playing sports obviously was a big part of it. But daydreaming, being bored,
yeah.
was something that I really actually look back on and say that was that honed this ability.
Yeah, and I love the kind of the immediate reaction to there was an intuitive sense of something, and investing in that intuition and seeing what was possible because of it, or what came to fruition, and this idea of truth. So
Mm,
talk us to a little bit more about the kind of aha moments that feel like truth. Like how do you make sense of that?
yeah. Well, something feels true. That it's not objective truth, obviously.
Yeah,
It's a very kind of comparative thing. But I think like when in my world, there's so many great people coming up with so many different ways of looking at business, looking at psychology, looking at neuroscience, looking at economics, and so on. And they're just lenses, slices of reality, and the ability to kind of take all of those things and keep on putting them into the blender, as
yeah,
it were, and see whether you come up with something else. That's kind of what I do. I fill myself every day with different aspects of it. So I might be reading or talking to economists or neuroscientists or business specialists, and it's that kind of like mix of things, triangulating all the time. And then every so often you see, oh my goodness, yeah, that's why that's happening.
yeah,
And, I don't want to sound arrogant, but, the thing that really makes the greatest difference is to be in the struggle to get to a first principle.
yeah,
And it's very easy to sit at that kind of symptomatic level. When you force yourself to kind of ask, well, what's the most basic question that is true in this situation, which again we don't give ourselves much time to do. that's when you get the real ha moments. That's, and you don't get many of them in your life. Let's be honest. But that is, like the question I ask myself, which is, it could be some variant of five whys or something like that. It's like really
Yeah.
keep on going until you can't go any deeper.
And so do you feel like there have been moments on this exploration where you kind of real once you'd seen something, once you'd understood that kind of that truth, that first principle, that there were just moments in your life where you realized, so nothing is ever going to be the same again now. I can't unsee that.
Yes, yes. I think one moment was uh, my first kind of meeting with Tony Schwartz, who founded the Energy Project. Who, we worked together and we set up the Energy Project globally, following that very productive time in my life, where his observation around when we're pushed into a negative emotional space, the most fundamental thing that's happening there is that your sense of value is under threat. And
Yeah,
every layer of interpretation you build around that is leading you away from reality. It's leading you away from what's really going on, what people are really thinking, and so on. And so, like that core emotional need to feel valued in the eyes of the people around you that you're dependent upon, and all the consequences of that was really kind of like transformational, because
yeah,
A, it was very simple, B, it was very actionable, and it's something that you can keep mining. It's never going to go. You're never going to not experience
yeah,
being triggered or having those negative emotions. But actually, in terms of thinking about it as a craft skill that you build, that was definitely something that has changed my life. And I wish I'd known it when I
yeah,
was,
yeah. I was going to
15 or
ask actually.
16.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, like, once you'd had that moment, when you started to then reflect back on experiences that had led you to that point, how are you then able to make sense of them? Can you share some of the moments that you were able to better make sense of because of that insight?
Yeah. Well, I think I can make sense of it in a number of ways. One is about being a child with your parents. So I had an incredible mother, who was the most loving and nurturing of people, and intelligent and wonderful. I mean, she's the hero in my story.
Yeah,
And when she died a few years ago, it was devastating, both to me and my kids and so on. And I had a father who was like the opposite of that, who wasn't quite as nurturing, and was it was very challenging. And
yeah,
the flip side of that is that you have confidence when you have a nurturing parent, but you also, when you have a slightly less one, you have a tendency to act out in certain situations where you're under threat, where you might become defensive or judgmental yourself.
yeah,
And I had, probably in my sort of early career, recognized that I needed to work on this, and I found a therapist. And in my 20s, because I was very early on, I was leading a business, and I needed to make sure that I wasn't kind of bound by this thing. um, and so I started working on it. But this revelation helped me to make sense of what was really going out, and the deepest kind of way in which you make sense of yourself in the world. It
yeah,
was hidden to me,
yeah,
in terms of that instinctive reaction. And then when you're in the throes of that, all of your intellectual capabilities are thrown into justifying it and
yeah,
making sense of it. Like, it's your fault. It's not my fault. Those are the two root causes of most of the problems we have in relationships, or in being a leader.
yeah. And for me, one of the things that feels really significant here is that kind of that shift now into almost understanding. So there was these kind of experiences that are really clear in that I love everything. Like I'm interested in everything. So it's not that the subject matter captures me. It's what sits behind the subject matter, or what can I explore within everything to find, kind of the wonder, or to find how it works, or to find the aha. Partly, shaped by an influence in your life who wasn't even around for very long, but the kind of the sheer mix of love and kindness and energy and interest and curiosity, and the kind of the provocation of all that, I guess, just kind of exploded into what might be possible in world experience, right the way to making choices or not making choices when asked to. Like, I'm not going to narrow down here. I'm going to stay really wide. The kind of the transition into really being able to understand what is meaningful to you, and utilize that, access that more kind of clearly.
Mm.
What are the things that really define meaningfulness for you in your life now, having been able to experience and see these things in that kind of, uncovering journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's the simplest way I would um, think about it. And I always think about things in visuals. I immediately sort of mapping out a PowerPoint slide of what this looks like, which is horrible,
I see
horrible
you looking around
tendency.
for a whiteboard. Can I draw this while we're on the podcast?
Well, I think the first is like being true to yourself about who you are, and making sure that you're not, like your purpose is your purpose. It's not somebody else's purpose. Um, and your values are your values. They're not, the values that you would like other people to see. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that. They see a list of values and they go, "Oh, those are the desirable ones for either being a parent or a leader," and so on. They select them, and then in the coaching conversations I've had with people, and I've thrown this light back on myself, they go, "Yeah, I, being a parent isn't a value that I really have.
Yeah,
I I love my kids, but I don't really. That's not my essence. That's not the reason that I exist to be a parent.
yeah,
And that brings with it a kind of a reality, and also a little bit of uncomfort, discomfort in
yeah,
that. So I think the starting point is being really clear who you are, and this wanting a creative life and wanting to make a difference and wanting to create impact is definitely somebody who I am. I wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur because I'm not trying to build. Some people would think of me like that because I've got I've had my own businesses over many years and set up businesses and scaled them and so on, but that's not who I am. I'm actually a creative problem solver. That's the essence of who I am. And hopefully I bring some inspiration with that because I'm passionate about it. And
yeah,
then the other thing, in terms of who I am, in terms of my values, um, some of those are really core to me in terms of almost like selfishness of wanting to be an artist, to actually understand what's going on and to be able to express it. And I know that is a suppressed value in me.
yeah,
It's been one that has taken time for it to. I've always kind of said no, no. I've kind of brought creativity into business and so on. But like I was in a band and I wanted to write novels and I wanted to paint and all these kind of things as a kid. And those things, just as I went down the science route and became a neuroscientist, I just left those things,
yeah,
because you can't do everything. Um, so now where I'm at is, values of creativity. Um, I think the other most important value for me is around well-being, because I know that when I sacrifice my well-being, everything else um, falls apart. I can't take care of other people if I'm not taking care of myself, and that is when start to dislike oneself,
yeah,
and resent others, and so on. And then I think there is another one of optimism.
yeah,
I believe in other people, until they disprove that in me. I give trust. I share. I'm not quite as extreme as you in this respect, but I believe other people have got a lot more potential, than they often believe in themselves, and when they do, amazing things can happen. And I also believe in playfulness as well. That's another value. It's like life is not just being serious. A lot of conversations are just so serious,
yeah,
and so like balance and so I am quite playful, and that has to be kept in track. Sometimes could step into inappropriateness when things are serious. So
I mean, that could be a podcast conversation in itself. John, where are the moments where you've overstepped the boundaries of playfulness?
Oh well, I think you need to get several of my colleagues to come and tell you because it's like John, you know. But I think there's another one which I've forgotten now because it was just as we were having that joke. But I'll come back to it. Yeah, it'll emerge. But
Well,
that's yeah.
yeah, and if it's okay, there's just something I was really curious about when you were talking about the kind of the artist and the scientist, and you were talking about then the kind of the nature of being a creative problem solver and this kind of sense of being a suppressed artist, and there almost being a kind of a selfishness to that, to needing to access that.
Mm,
um, I'm wondering if we could just stay with that for a second and come back to the values piece, because that's something that a lot of people don't acknowledge in
mm,
themselves. There are things that they want or things that they need that they try to suppress or minimize because of a, a perception or an expectation of selfishness. Yet actually, it can be the thing that completely unleashes us. And sense of purpose is about, it's about liberation, it's about freedom, it's about, you know, what's possible. And
yeah.
so how have you managed that tension?
Well, it is a tension, and I think the first part of it is recognizing the need,
Yeah,
and not sort of. I mean, it's not a want. I think that's the important thing. It's not a want. It's not something. It's a need, and the need in you is something that you need to express.
yeah,
And however you need to express it, you need to find a way of first acknowledging it and then going, how can I get what I need?
yeah,
Because if you cut out all the wants and focus on the needs first and make those the priority, then the wants might manifest themselves just as a result of that. So if, for example, you have a need to express yourself physically, playing sport or making things, like you really want to be in your shed playing with bits of wood or whatever it is. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound derogatory around that. That fills me with dread. But the idea of meeting those needs, or the need to have deep connection with loved ones and so on, it's really getting clear about those needs, because when those needs aren't met, then the story of your life is governed by resentment.
yeah,
And you find ways of dealing with the resentment. You blame other people, you buy things to fill the hole, you tell yourself stories about things that you want that you don't want, and so on. So I think, like what I guess living a really purposeful life is eliminating resentment.
yeah, yeah. Wow. And the the process of almost reflection in being able to uncover that feels like the kind of the lever. It feels like the mechanism that people can access. You know, we're
Mm.
going to have people listening to this podcast who are immediately asking themselves the question right now, like, how do you do that? How do you get to that? How do you see those things, acknowledge those things, create a level of acceptance around those things? Like, what's that process been like for you, John? How have you managed to do that?
Yeah, well, I think what one is this sort of inner exploration and the divergent thinking. So going on a walk and actually getting myself into a state where I can have that question with myself, because this is the inner coach. This is
Yeah,
metacognition, the ability to think about how you're thinking, and give over to that and say, well, what do you actually need here? What do you really want? And any form of journey into searching for your purpose, that's the only place it's going to come from.
mm,
There are other people that can help you when you have made a decision to want to actually do this.
yeah,
So I think that's the starting point. And as your needs become more clear to you, and there are lots of them, lots of different potential ones, ranging from taking care of yourself, feeling valued by other people, feeling connected, making a contribution, to the world at large, as a kind of nested set of these things. Then you have your aha moment of, this is what I really need.
yeah,
Then the challenge is to operationalize it. Like, how
yeah,
can you get what you need when everybody else wants what they need as well? So like and you and I have talked about this before, one of the battlegrounds is free time.
yeah,
So if you think about your weekend, you amble into your weekend going, it's like I can relax now. Of course you can't. Your family wants all of this stuff for you. My wife has got a to-do list as long as your arm. Your kids want you to do this. And you want to get some rest, you want to do something interesting, you want to read a book, you want to discover something, you want to go somewhere, you want to do some exercise, what are all of those things? And you haven't made any plan. You just have this assumption that it's going to somehow happen
Yeah.
with everybody else. So, like in very simple terms, you need to bargain and plan and sit around the table once a week and go like, so what are we going to do this week? How does everybody get what they need?
Yeah.
And when you have that conversation, I remember when we first introduced that concept into a client, 18, 19 years ago, I remember one of the directors of this company coming back to me 6 months later and said, "You've saved my marriage." We were about to get divorced, and we started doing these family conferences. And all of a sudden, our weekends became joyous moments. We were literally at each other's throats, kids and my wife and I were at each other's throats every weekend. We hated being with each other, and now we love being with each other. It's such an incredible story. I mean, literally, he had tears in his eyes when he was telling me this, and I was like, "Wow, this works."
Yeah.
And one of the things that we always have to ask is, are we taking our own medicine?
Yeah. And what feels powerful to me is the kind of the simplicity of the message here: want versus need, but the genuine impact of being able to clarify the difference between those two things and take accountability for those
Mm,
two things. Because how often do people turn around to each other and say, "What do you need in this moment? What do you need in this weekend? What do you need? Full stop." Versus, "What do you want to do today?"
yeah,
And there's just kind of there's an inherent bias or assumption based in answering a question of what do you want to do, versus actually just even considering what do I need takes you to a completely different mental place.
yeah. Well, let's just dig into that for a moment, because one of the you asked how do you do that, and um, what you have to recognize is that when you have suppressed your needs and maybe do feel a degree of resentment, even unconsciously, you have become numb.
Yeah.
And when you're numb, accessing your needs is really difficult because you've switched off the emotional responses to it. It's like addiction. In any way an addict can keep coping with the hangovers and the downs is to numb the emotional response associated with it. So you watch somebody who's just like a real heavy drinker, and they get up the next morning and you go, God, have you not got a really bad headache? It's not because just physiologically they're dealing with it. Emotionally, they've switched off that feeling. So to tap into needs is hard when you're numb. So
Yeah.
you have to unfreeze the emotional response in order to deal with, effectively, as a form of addiction, to not dealing with that. And then wants are a way of feeding the numbness of
Yeah.
of coping with the numbness.
Yeah. And I again, what's creating real simplicity here is the understanding of the role of emotion in the difference between want and need,
Mm,
and what those two things are servicing, and almost just creating the kind of the permission in ourselves to feel stuff.
yeah,
Because the more that we're not judging what that emotional experience is like, we're just trying to have it and understand it, the more we're getting to the truth, as you said before, the kind of the so this is almost a human functioning first principle. Can Do you know you're feeling something, and if and if you do, what is it?
yeah.
Because without that, everything else is skewed.
Well, that was another kind of aha moment for me, and more recently, which built on this idea of your emotions and how they tap into this sense of core value. Which, talking to neuroscientists like Lisa Feldman Barrett and Mark Solms, where Mark actually said on a conversation that I had with him, is that, just think about it like this: negative emotions are a signal that a need in you is not being met. And what that, unpacking that, it says a couple of things which are really important. So the first is that negative emotions are valuable information. All emotions are valuable information. That's kind of Mark Brackett's take on permission to
Yeah,
feel. But negative emotions tell you something. They're not the messy noise that's getting in the way of you being logical. They are actually a form of very profound first principle information. They
yeah,
are telling you that a core need in you is not being met. Now, that most profound core need is that you're not valued in this situation,
Yeah.
or that you can't sustain yourself in this situation, or you're not connected in this situation to somebody or something you care about, you're being excluded, or that you don't have the information on which to base it. These are core needs.
Yeah.
So that was a real aha moment for me, which is now we can read our emotions differently. So you can read them at two levels. One is needs, and the other is the granularity of the words that we use to describe the emotions, because most of us only use 4 or 5 words to describe how we're feeling, and as a
Yeah.
result we don't know. I'm just angry.
Yeah.
Are you angry? Are you ashamed, or are you embarrassed, or are
Yeah.
you guilty? Anger is just a inaccurate description for most of our feelings. And when you understand what you're actually feeling, then you can really understand what need is not being met.
Yeah. Brilliant. Sorry, John. I'm just gonna have to let the dog out here. She was lovely and quiet, and
The
now she's
dog is
gone.
getting bored. That's a good signal when I'm doing into monologue. The
The
dog is
wicket's
getting
gone. I've
bored.
had enough. I'm out. So sorry about that, John. I hope you're paying attention. There's an edit in there. Um, so okay. Immediately, where I want to kind of bring this back to, if we talk about this idea of sense of purpose, and I use that language really intentionally, because purpose is a feeling, all right? So it's a sense of something.
Mm,
And you talked before about the kind of the journey. I asked you how, and where you started was recognizing and understanding these needs. And there's
mm,
this kind of principle that you've been describing about value and feeling valued. And for me, one of the outcomes of clarity around a sense of purpose is, you know, what's really meaningful to you. If you make a contribution to those things, then you feel a sense of value and self-worth, because um, it's significant, it's important, and you're creating impact around it. So immediately that sense of self is kind of heightened and reaffirmed.
yeah.
And I guess what I'm interested in from your perspective is, where are the strongest influences on your sense of self-worth in
Mm.
your life? How have you identified those, and how do you continue to access them?
Oh, that's a very big question. Um,
You knew what you were getting into coming on this. I was only going to hit
yeah.
you with the haymakers.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to have a lie down after this. Um, I think the honest truth is that it's a very big question, and there are lots of components to it. But I think the point you were making earlier on around knowing who you are and where you can make a difference is essentially kind of like a relationship with the world. That's what purpose, I think, is at its essence. It's a different relationship between the world. You're not alone.
Yeah,
You are making a contribution. By what you're either you're making a contribution, full stop, whether it's a good one or a bad one. You're taking or you're giving, or you're not doing anything. And I think that it's just like, who am I, and what do I care about? That feedback loop is that every time you contribute, you're getting something back. You're getting
yeah,
a sense of purpose, progress, affirmation. So, and I don't think it's just, well, I don't know. I mean, it is tied up with ego. There's no question about it.
yeah,
But I think what you're trying to do is more clear-sightedly not rely on other people's judgment and appraisals of it,
agreed.
because
Yeah,
otherwise you're not going to do the things. I mean,
yeah,
like, I know that a lot of the things I've done in the past that have been groundbreaking have been met by lots of skepticism by either
yeah,
clients or my own team and so on. And I don't believe I'm arrogant in that respect. I believe
yeah,
that I am searching for something I believe in, and when I have done the work,
yeah,
and it's not my ego or my dream idea that's coming into play, it's actually well thought through. If it's challenging the status quo, that's going to create resistance. And I
yeah,
appreciate that, and acknowledge it. And it's sometimes painful. So there is something in terms of delivering a purpose, which is, it's not all pleasure.
yeah,
It's equal, taking a stoic kind of position on this. Pleasure and pain are equal in measure when you live a purposeful life, because you
Yeah.
have to do a lot of things that other people don't like.
Yeah. And and in the pain, actually, there is meaning to be found.
Hmm.
And when you see and find the meaning, actually, it makes the pain bearable. And let's be honest, true growth only comes when you go into the pain.
Yeah.
If you stay in the comfort, you're not moving on. There's no learning, there's no adaptation. And so being able to embrace that, see it and embrace it, and use purpose as a mechanism for it, I think becomes a vehicle for all of us to kind of go into the unknown a little bit more readily. And especially given we are living in a world of absolute uncertainty,
Yeah.
there's something in being able to have that as a way to create confidence and clarity.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree totally.
You also didn't answer my question by answering where you get a kind of
Oh,
the
okay.
influences on your sense of self worth. So I'm not going to
Okay.
allow you to dodge it, John, by giving me a really wonderfully articulated intellectual answer.
Okay, I get it. All right, I'll try and summarize this in as succinctly as I can. So I think we've covered off the first building block, which is really being clear about who I am, and this is the interior
Yeah,
coach, the interior monologue, and making sure that there's no fundamental doubt in that, and if there is, that I'm working on it. The second is that I am working on a problem I care about deeply. I'm doing work that plays to that, and that because I'm fortunate to be able to a large extent set my own agenda because I run my own business, to actually do things I care about and to
yeah,
eliminate the things I don't. Doesn't mean that I have to. I'm always doing work that is easy or whatever, because there's no such thing. And then I suppose the other final piece of it is to surround myself with people who I care about and who bring, care about me, care about what I'm doing, care about what we're doing, and I care about them in equal
yeah,
measure. And that I have no feelings of um, resentment towards the people I work with.
yeah.
That is the recipe, I think, in very simple terms.
And I think just knowing you, John, that's true as much outside of your kind of professional environment as much as it is inside your professional environment. There's a real commitment to those that you care about, but also there's a kind of a need to boundary that. it's
Mm.
not it's not it's not unequivocal for everybody. It's kind of focused and intentional. There is a reciprocity. You invest, I invest. As you said before, there's kind of an optimism and a quickness to trust, but there has to be an investment too, right?
Yeah, well, it's an old adage, but everything that's worth having in life is based on reciprocity. You can't get respect or love or trust unless you give it, and you have to give it, in small measure, without condition.
Yeah,
If it comes with, if it's conditional, then it's not what do you say it is.
yeah, yeah. Agreed. And so I think there's kind of a final part here that I want to explore, mainly because I get really excited about it, which is the kind of the leap of faith element of what purpose enables. So you've talked a little bit already about
Mm.
wanting to kind of disrupt the status quo, and that almost being something that feels like a intuitive um, driver and motivator for you. But I'm wondering where else and how else does purpose and clarity of purpose enable you to take leaps of faith and really find out what's possible rather than what has been before?
I think there are two big components of this which are worth digging into. The first is imagination, because if you think about what negative emotions are for, they are really to save you from death.
Yeah,
They're there to protect you from all forms of environmental and social harm. Positive emotions, on the other hand, are there to allow you to build and create and form either relationships or new ideas, to create value in uncertainty. So when you marry somebody, you feel positive about it. hopefully.
Yeah. Fingers
on the
crossed,
basis
everybody.
on the
Ladies
basis
and
that you
gents, you
have
should definitely be feeling positive to some degree. Yeah.
well, on the basis that, like, you're making a set of assumptions about the future
Yeah.
that are based on very little information,
Yeah.
despite your best efforts, because you are going to be different versions of you in, 2 to 3 year increments over the course of your life that, you could never imagine,
Mm.
physically, emotionally, mentally, contextually, what's happening in your families and so on. And very few people start marriage by thinking about, well, what's it going to be like to live with this person when they're 60?
Yeah.
What will their families be doing? What will I be doing with them? And so, I mean, like, if you literally thought about that, you would have a very different life. You
Yeah.
would really think differently, and very few of us are ever trained to do that. So, imagination is one part of it. Is the ability to harness positive emotions to construct future scenarios. And the second part of it, which is the other end of the spectrum, is tapping into something you said earlier on, which is purpose as emotion, which is definitely true, because if you talk to neuroscientists like Robert Burton, their position on certainty is that it is not a logical process, it's an emotion.
Yeah.
We have conviction about things that we feel positive about because we've done the maths. We kind of go, well, that bit's certain, that bit's uncertain, that bit I have no idea. And so, in order to be able to make bets on the future in an uncertain environment, you need emotional conviction. You need the marriage of what you know and what you don't know, and then you need conviction. And the conviction part of it is purely emotional.
Yeah.
If you do not have emotional conviction, you'll never do anything for the future. So purpose gives you, it's an underpinning of emotional conviction combined with imagination. That's where you have the leap of faith. You're constructing the invisible bridge to start walking out. I
Yeah.
believe, because I can see it and I can feel this is going to be safe, I can start to make the future real.
You know, you just there's an image just popped into my head of Indiana Jones of all things.
Yes.
I kind of I make sense of my life through movies, but The Last Crusade, by far the best of all of them, and he's passing the test, isn't he, trying to get
Yeah.
to the Grail? And the last test is the leap of faith, and
Yeah.
actually just kind of stepping out into the unknown. And what was really beautiful about that scene for me is the angle that they shot it out purposefully showed kind of this gap that he had to step into. But then as he stepped forward, they changed the angle of the camera, and that actually there is a path there the whole time. You just couldn't see it until you'd taken
Mm.
the first step. And that feels just really powerful in what you're describing, this kind of connection between imagination and emotion, and people trusting those two things because they are coming from a real source of data and information. They can be trusted, and they can enable you to do more than you thought possible.
Mm.
um, John, I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to be in this conversation today. It's been wonderful to explore this territory with you, and I'm wondering if you just had kind of final words for people who are kind of wrestling with the concept of purpose, or wrestling with how to start to and begin to access their sense of purpose. What would you say to them as kind of a final note?
I think it is a liberating force in your life. I think it's a prize, because one of the things that we're not very good at is recognizing our future self. What we will become in the future. All the research shows that we are impossibly bad at imagining what we're going to be like in the future. And one of the psychological barriers to that is that we have a disconnection with our future self. We almost see it as a different person
Hmm.
rather than who we are.
Yeah,
And one of the pieces of research around this shows that the most continuous thing that joins us between our younger and older self is our moral self.
yeah,
And our moral self is grounded in our purpose. It's grounded in our values and so on. That when someone has dementia and somebody has and you can't see that in them, that's when they lose themselves.
yeah,
And people in marriages who see that change in the minute that person loses their moral self, their sense of purpose and identity, that's when that person has lost to them. So if
yeah,
we take that as a concept and say, look, this is like it's purpose is like sometimes feels like an aspirational thing that you need to do in order
yeah,
to be a better person. It's not. It's who you are already.
Yeah.
And tapping into it will give you a prize of a greater sense of connection about who you are in the world. And it's really worth nurturing.
Amazing. John, thank you very much for being on the Excitable Soul podcast. I can't wait for everybody to hear this conversation. Thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure, James. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are welcome, sir. Massive thank you for taking the time to listen to the Excitable Soul podcast. If you are interested in uncovering, understanding, and unleashing your sense of purpose, come and explore our purpose immersion programs at theexcitablesoul.com. We look forward to hearing from you there or being with you on our next episode. Have an incredible day.